Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon session of the Board of Supervisors meeting. Call it meeting to order. CEO Espinosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, today we're going to have an open public hearing. This hearing is going to be considering the project and the approval of use permit 1048-11A-E, approval for Indian Wells pilot program. Adopt resolution making CEQA and use permit findings, approving the mitigated negative declaration, approving the conditional use of permit and denying the appeal, and taking other related actions, or provide direction to staff and continue the matter to July 9, 2013 for further consideration. And this is resolution number 2013-41. And we have Byron out of our planning department here to hold this public hearing. Byron?
Thank you. On April 17, 2013, the San Bernardino County Planning Commission approved the use permit for the Indian Wells pilot program for Citadel, which is located in the Bitterwater area, southwest San Bernardino County. The Planning Commission approval included the adoption of the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring program. The Center for Biological Diversity filed an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision in there within 10 days of the approval. The project being appealed consists of an oil exploratory drilling program and temporary pilot thermal enhanced recovery project located in the Bitterwater area in southwestern San Bernardino County. Up to 15 test wells will be drilled over a 2-year period to collect core data on the underlying subsurface oil reservoir. The drilling data would then be used to determine which wells, if any, are suitable candidates for a pilot thermal enhanced recovery program. The pilot recovery program would be conducted over a 5-year period. The approved project does not include or commit the county to approve the future development of the subsurface reservoir. The pilot project alone would not result in long-term oil production, but rather would provide the data necessary to determine whether long-term production is feasible. Potential future oil field operations on the site are not included in the project. If long-term production is proven to be economically viable, consideration and approval, including further environmental review of a subsequent use permit and the consistency with any future oil ordinance would be required. This project was first heard by the Planning Commission on December 5, 2012, after circulation of an initial study from August 6 to September 4, 2012. In response to comments on the initial study, the Planning Commission on December 5 continued the project to February 20th to allow revisions to the initial study and for its recirculation. The initial study was recirculated through the State Clearinghouse from January 15th to February 13th. The Planning Commission reviewed the project at public hearings on February 20th, March 20th, and April 17th. On April 17th, the Planning Commission adopted the mitigated negative declaration and approved the use permit and mitigation monitoring program. The conditions of approval, the Center for Biological Diversity's appeal is primarily based on environmental concerns, which are addressed by the CEQA document and responded to at length in your document. I'm not going to go through them individually, but if you have any questions about them, we can, and the legal team can address them. So as I said before, this project is an exploratory drilling program. It's a temporary project, and I wanted to point out that fracking is not involved and not permitted under this permit. It's important for this project to point out that the applicant has volunteered to implement many of the conditions of the county's yet to be adopted oil well ordinance. So while this project technically did not fall under the purview of our new ordinance that has yet to be adopted, the applicant voluntarily complied with many of the provisions as applicable, and that's beginning with condition 19 in your staff report. Every condition beyond 19 is are conditions that were derived from our draft oil well ordinance. This includes increased reporting requirements, prohibition of fracking, increased grading requirements, additional safety measures, and the ability for the county to require water testing. This report that you have has been prepared recommending that the board deny the appeal, but the board has the discretion to direct any other action, including modifying the project. It is staff's recommendation that you, 1, hold a public hearing and consider the project and the appeal that which has been filed. And number 2, if desired by the board, it is recommended that the board adopt the attached resolution making CEQA and use permit findings, approving the mitigated negative declaration, approving the conditional use permit and use permit findings, and denying, and denying the Center for Biological Diversity's appeal and taking other related actions. If the board wishes to take other action, it is recommended that the board provide direction to staff and continue the matter to July 9th, 2013 for further action, but we have prepared it to deny the appeal at this time. I'm available for questions as well as the applicant's team.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Any questions from the board for Mr. Turner? If not, why don't we go ahead and start with the appellant and their presentation on why they submitted this appeal.
Good afternoon. David Hobstetter for Center for Biological Diversity. The project approval here is regarding 15 oil wells on a site near a national park, and at the project location is important habitat for critically endangered California condors. The project will also use a energy-intensive and highly polluting process called cyclic steam injection, which is a method of stimulating production from an oil well. There's substantial evidence in the record here indicating that significant impacts could result. And as a result of that, what you should do is to reverse the staff's the decision here and require the production of an environmental impact report fully addressing all of the potential environmental impacts. All of our arguments and points are discussed in our appeal. I'll just briefly cover a few very important ones, I think, here. And again, these are more thoroughly discussed in our appeal. First, cyclic steam injection creates incredibly harsh conditions in a well that can cause the well to cause the surrounding earth to subside and collapse. This is extremely dangerous. In Southern California, it's resulted in numerous something called surface expressions, which is basically when the steam and fluid from underground reaches the surface. And in Southern California, there have been occasions where it's actually erupted out of the subsurface and sprayed fluid up to 100 feet in distance. It actually even resulted in the death of an oil worker who fell into a sinkhole caused by the cyclic steam injection. Here, the staff's explanation, or the staff hasn't fully analyzed the significant potential impacts of cyclic steam injection, and it's attempted to explain away the problem by trying to distinguish all of the substantial evidence we've provided, evidence that pertains to this specific technology, cyclic steam injection, from Southern California and other places as well. But they try to explain it away because it's not specific to the project site, but under CEQA that's not sufficient. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me as I'm going along. So again, there's substantial evidence in the record indicating cyclic steam injection will create hazardous conditions leading to significant impacts. Second, cyclic steam injection consumes large amounts of water and can also lead to water contamination. The project here is projected to use over 17 million gallons of water. And there are two different places it could come from. It could come from on-site from a water well created as part of the project, which wasn't analyzed in the mitigating negative declaration or initial study. Or it could also come from off-site from a a source of water that's already overdrawn and that's relied on by farmers. The staff tries to explain why it's not significant by saying that it's the same amount of water that would be used by 10 acres of crops over a 1-year period. But simply making that comparison doesn't mean that those impacts aren't significant. Also, cyclic steam injection could result in water contamination. In Canada, the process resulted in the discharge of about 55,000 cubic meters of produced water, oil, and solids into aquifers when it caused 6 wells to fail. And again, the staff tries to explain this away by saying this evidence from Canada is inapplicable here because it's not specific to the project site. But the actual evidence here shows that's totally unpersuasive. The steam injection will likely occur about 300 feet under the ground. So we would only have to travel, the collapsing of the subsurface would only need to result in the movement of the fluid and steam about 300 feet, 350 feet to have it reach the surface. In Southern California, it actually, those surface expressions resulted from migration through over 1,000 feet. So there's clearly substantial evidence in this record here showing that there could be significant impacts, and that requires the production of an EIR. Third, cyclic steam injection is an incredibly energy-intensive process, and it's used, so it uses a lot of energy to produce the steam. Then also the oil that it's pulling out of the ground is heavy and dirty oil, and together these things mean that it has a very significant impact on the climate. Again, the staff hasn't looked at this in sufficient detail. In particular, they haven't covered or analyzed how the operations might vary in terms of how much cyclic steam injection is employed. They assume about between steam injection, soaking, and production of the oil, they assume it'll be about 57.6 days each. But the documents say that it could be more than that. But yet they don't analyze the greenhouse gases that could result from the additional soaking, the additional steam injection. They also have refused to consider methane emissions, which is a well-known problem for oil and gas operations around the country. And also, while the project is being characterized as a exploration project, a test project, the initial study here says that they expect or assumes a production of about 150,000 barrels of oil. Now, the combustion of this oil is clearly foreseeable because they're saying that that is going to occur. And the staff already predicts that greenhouse gas emissions will just be 2% below the significance threshold they've chosen. But looking at the combustion of this oil, which is clearly foreseeable, which is the analysis that is required under CEQA, the combustion of that oil could, in a conservative estimate, result in about 40,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. Adding that to the emissions that the staff has looked at puts the total emissions 5 times over the significance threshold they have chosen. So there's clearly substantial evidence in the record indicating that an EIR is necessary here. Fourth, the project could also harm critically endangered California condors, as well as threatened California tiger salamanders. California condor is one of the most critically endangered birds in the world. There are only 400 of them alive. One of the principal release points for all the condors were actually taken out of the wild at one point. It's been a really heroic effort reintroducing them to the wild and trying to make sure that they survive. But one of the major release points is over at Pinnacles National Park, and it's only a few miles from the project site. And condors have actually been photographed using the site, a number of them. Oil operations are known to cause danger to California condors. Exposure to fluids, including the oiling of the condors, can result in death. Another common problem is condors will pick up trash around project sites and feed it to their chicks, which actually has killed a number of chicks. For the California tiger salamander, harm could result from the grading of the land for the construction of the wells. California tiger salamanders spend much of their life in the underground burrows of small mammals. The project could result in the destruction of these burrows. Also, increased traffic from the project could cause a salamander. They migrate from long distances between their burrows to ponds where they'll breed, and as a result, if there are California tiger salamanders on site, they'll probably be migrating across the site. This raises the risk that increased vehicle traffic could result in a salamander being run over and killed. The staff acknowledges that the harming of even one of these animals would constitute a significant effect, but nevertheless argues that there isn't substantial evidence in the record showing that that could happen. That's not the case. The record has substantial evidence in it showing that a significant effect to these animals is possible. The mitigation measures they propose here defer actual mitigation, and they're also too ambiguous to enforce, so they don't really ensure that significant effects won't occur. And my last point that I want to mention is the staff continues to ignore the potential for the project to cause earthquakes. And they received a letter describing supposedly why the project wouldn't cause earthquake concerns. The letter said that this isn't hydraulic fracturing. There's no evidence of earthquakes from cyclic steam injection. Nevertheless, the record here shows substantial evidence that wastewater injection is a well-known cause of earthquakes. Multiple studies in the record. Recently, a study by Karanen indicated that in Oklahoma, of all places, I mean, not even California, Oklahoma, wastewater injection triggered an earthquake of magnitude 5.7. And the staff tries to distinguish the reports, say they're not substantial evidence because there's no fracking, but wastewater injection will occur. They might even construct a wastewater injection well on the site. So there's clearly substantial evidence that significant effects could result from the triggering of an earthquake. So in sum, there is substantial evidence before the board here indicating that significant effects certainly could result from this project. At minimum, what you should do is to reverse the decision and require environmental impact report. Thank you. And
Thank you
I'd be
very
happy to
much.
take your questions.
Any questions from the board at this time? I don't see any questions at this point in time. Maybe we'll call you back up in a little bit later afterwards and clarify some points.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Would the, I guess the applicant have a statement or presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Anthony Lombardo on behalf of the applicant. I'm certain that Mr. Hofstetter is very sincere in his beliefs that this is a bad project and that it's going to harm the environment, and believes that the last thing this board should do is approve the project. Unfortunately, Mr. Hofstetter's beliefs or articles about projects in Oklahoma where the wells that they're talking about were drilled 4 or 5 kilometers underground have nothing to do with the project that's before you today. Just as the discussion he gave you about what's called high-pressure steam flood has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, because that's not the project that's before you. That's not the proposed method of oil production testing that's before you. It's not this project. And so the fact that condors may have eaten garbage somewhere and harmed their chicks, or landed in oil somewhere and been harmed, although there was nothing in the material he submitted that had any evidence that that's occurred anywhere, is a bad thing. We have no argument with that. That isn't going to happen here. That isn't what we're proposing here. This is the initial study that your staff prepared. It's the size of many EIRs you read. And there were 2 initial studies prepared. A new one was done after the initial responses to the first one to ensure that all the comments that came in that raised all the issues of concern were dealt with by appropriate mitigation. The appellant ignores all of the conditions of approval and all of the mitigations imposed by your planning commission, including specific mitigations to preclude any impacts from tiger salamander, to preclude impacts on California condor, all of which were not invented by the applicant, but were recommended and suggested by the resource agencies involved, like the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Service. So this is not a project where someone just decided to go out and drill some test wells and the Planning Commission said, fine, go ahead. We have dozens, probably, of conditions and mitigations which are designed to ensure that there is no potential significant effect on the environment. And the appellant's contention that the Board of Supervisors has to prepare an EIR to study what might occur if this project is successful in determining that there is a potential for commercial oil production is simply not consistent with the law. The California Supreme Court twice has stated that preparing an EIR for production of oil when all that's before you is a test drilling is inappropriate. It's wrong and it's illegal. And so you're not approving, as staff has already said, you're not approving the production of oil, a project that's going to result in commercial production of oil. You're resulting in a test project, and that's all that this is. And so we would respectfully request that you support the determination of your staff and the Planning Commission's unanimous decision and uphold their decision to approve the use permit with the conditions that have been imposed. I would like to save a moment or two for rebuttal in case there's any other members of the public that bring up other points other than that.
Well, yeah, kind of the way I thought I'd proceed with this is for the Board of Supervisors to ask any specific questions of Mr. Lombardo or the, representing the applicant. And if not, then we would go to the public comment period and then ask you to come back up to rebuttal any concerns that are expressed through the public comment, and then I'll have the Center of Biodiversity close.
Great, thank you.
Is there any questions for Mr. Lombardo?
Should we, I think the questions that I have, I'm not sure if we should reserve them until everyone speaks, and then they could answer our questions, or should we do that now?
Well, if we have a question for Mr. Lombardo, we could do that right now. And then if not, then I would say open up public comment and hear from the public. But
I'd rather hear from everyone.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you. With that, would anybody from the public would like to address the board on this matter?
Martin Salaberry. Hello, my name is Martin Soliberry. I live at 35921 Airline Highway, which is within 6 miles of where they're going to drill the wells. I have a water shortage to begin with. My concern is the water. What's going to happen to our groundwater levels when they start taking 17 million gallons of water? We're on the fault line to begin with, condors, but my main thing is water. You know, we're on 165 years of record keeping of rainfall totals, and this is the driest year of 165 years of record keeping. So my main concern is water levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Charles Hinkle.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the landowner, Charlie Hinkle, 5 Oaks. And we concurred with the planning department on their original deal, and we got quite a bit put in there. The only thing I'd like to say that I was uncomfortable from the get-go on this whole project is the temporary nature of it, because in my mind, I've been in the oil business 40 years, there's no such thing as temporary oil wells. And at least I think a full-blown environmental impact report would probably be beneficial to the county. I think it'd save you some grief down the road, because you're definitely going to get faced with people wanting to frack wells, do other things. And my only advice is let's get this one right from the start. I mean, I'm not against anybody drilling wells. I'm all for Citadel getting in there and doing what they need to do. It's just, I think everybody needs to be protected. And the water, as Mr. Salisbury said, is a big concern, because it is going to be a shallow aquifer situation. But that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott Sherbinski.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Sherbinski. I'm a condor biologist with Pinnacles National Park. On behalf of the park, I would like to say thank you for being here today, everybody. It's an honor to have the opportunity to discuss the concern over the endangered California condor water resources of San Benito County, and our request that the county further consult the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the potential impacts of the Indian Wells pilot project. The California condor is the largest soaring bird in North America, with a 9.5-foot wingspan and an average weight of about 20 pounds. They're scavengers, feeding only on dead carcasses they find while foraging across the landscapes. Condors are slow to reproduce. They take 6 years to reach maturity. They typically only produce, or they always only produce, 1 egg per nesting attempt, and typically only nest every other year. This sensitivity has made the condors one of the world's rarest birds, and it was narrowly saved from extinction in the early 1980s when their numbers hit a low of just 22 individuals. Recovery efforts have been successful but not complete. There are now around 400 condors in existence, 240 of which are in the wild. The 65 condors that fly over Central California account for a full 1/4 of the entire world free-flying population. Pinnacles National Park is the only national park unit that operates a wild release site for condors, and San Benito County is one of the very few places in the world that you can see condors today. We are concerned about the potential impacts on California condor recovery that would result from this project. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for managing this endangered species, and we suggest following their recommendation that further consultation with them should occur before this project continues. Recovery efforts of the federally endangered California condor have benefited directly from ranching and hunting traditions in southern San Benito County. Condors regularly make use of livestock troughs as water sources for bathing and drinking. They forage on carcasses left behind by hunting and ranching opportunities and find nesting habitats on both private and public land. As many as 40 condors have been observed during a single day on the 5 Oaks Ranch, specifically using this ranch's water resources. We are concerned about the project's potential impacts to the rural character and limited water resources that make San Benito County a unique and desirable location for farming, recreation, and wildlife conservation. The open working landscapes that define San Benito County are not only essential to our communities, rural traditions, economic stability, and food production, but also to the conservation of our natural and cultural resources. Pinnacles National Monument wrote a letter to the county Planning Office on March 13th, 2013, expressing our concerns and requesting that a more thorough analysis of the Indian Wells pilot project and its potential effects on the California chondro population should take place. Today, we would like to reiterate that request and extend an offer to assist in gathering information on specific questions regarding chondros that may arise. On behalf of the park and myself, I would like to thank the board for their time, and I'll be available for questions. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any questions for the park representative? I think I have one, and Supervisor Barrios. I'll allow Supervisor Barrios go first.
Yeah, thank you. When you mentioned that they should have further consultation with the, did you say United States
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Fish and Wildlife? And that, because I thought that they had already actually consulted with them, but are you saying that there should be further conversation to see if there's additional things they can do to mitigate?
That is our opinion. I believe it's part of public record, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did submit a letter to the County Planning Committee requesting that further consultation take place. And they, as the management agency for endangered species, would follow their suit and make the same recommendation that the county take up their offer for further consultation.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. My question stems from, I imagine condors don't know property lines and where the park begins and where it ends, and so naturally we all need to be aware of that and concerned. And just short of denying this project, though, what mitigation should have been taken into consideration to protect condors? Because the way I read this project, everything's kind of in tanks and is enclosed.
Understood, and that's a great question. That's a question that we have as well. That's a question that we, although we assist in the management of the bird, we do not make programmatic level decisions such as what should be done. Again, that's a job of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and because they've requested further consultation, we support that request and say that that question should only be answered through further consultation with them.
Okay. Thank you. Supervisor Munzer?
Actually, I have a question for Byron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When you received the letter from U.S. Fish and Wildlife for this additional consultation, was any consultation done with them, or was the letter just filed?
I don't believe we followed up with U.S. Fish and Wildlife on their consultation. We had mitigation measures and worked with California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they helped us formulate the mitigation measures for the revised document. That was one of the reasons why we recirculated the initial study, was to put further conditions in there on the California condor. So we had different staff people working on this project. I can't tell you if a staff person directly consulted with Fish and Wildlife, or if they just simply put it in the file as part of the record.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Barrios?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Byron, is it possible that after the additional mitigations that you had, that U.S. Fish and Wildlife may be satisfied that there was enough mitigation? Do you know if maybe a follow-up phone call could
We could always
do a
we could always follow up.
Because you did the additional mitigations after the initial letter from U.S. Fish and Wildlife then?
I believe we had initial letters from Fish and Wildlife and,
The mitigations done after.
California, yes.
Okay, well, that's what I needed to hear. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chair, Byron, did the applicant respond to the Fish and Game letter? Do you know that?
Well, we amended the mitigation measure as part of the response, and I can, if the applicant wants to.
That's actually up to the chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anthony Lombardo. And absolutely, when we received the letter that was forwarded to us by the staff, I reached out personally to the Fish and Wildlife Service office in Ventura, told them that the county had been working with the California Fish and Wildlife Service to develop specific condor mitigations, which is mitigation on page number 5 at the bottom, D, Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3. I told the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service we had these mitigations that have been provided by California Fish and Wildlife Service, and sent them to them and said if there's anything in addition you'd like, because we were in this lengthy process with your Planning Commission, to please provide them to us because we're obviously trying to be as inclusive as possible. Nothing ever was received. So I presume, it's speculation on my part, that once they reviewed the mitigation measures that were created by the staff after California Fish and Wildlife Service consultation, that they were satisfied because they never responded to us with any additional information. And those, by the way, address the issues that everyone has discussed, that there's a monitor on site that monitors every aspect of the activities of the drilling for condors specifically, that has the authority to stop the job if a condor comes in proximity. And Roman numeral 3 is that requires the applicant not to have any garbage or any refuse around the site that would attract condors. So everything that everyone has suggested as being a necessary mitigation to ensure that the condors are not affected are incorporated in that condition number D at the bottom of, it's 12D at the bottom of page 5. And Fish and Wildlife Service never suggested any additional ones. So we did everything we could to solicit their input. Again, I presume that because we are literally going to have a condor watcher, for one of a better, a qualified condor biologist on the site during these activities to ensure there's no impact on condors, they must have been satisfied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Barrios?
Thank you. Mr. Lombardo, this monitor, you did say, and that was going to be one of my questions, if it was a biologist.
Right.
And it is a biologist.
It is a biologist who has...
Very schooled on what to look for and what to do and what to report. And now, how often will they be on the site?
Well, the condition says that they have to be there during the activities, the drilling activities, and in fact, it requires that it has to be a biologist who's qualified or knowledgeable about condor. It can't be someone who's a salmon biologist.
Right,
It's
so-
someone that has to be qualified to deal with the condor.
Okay, and
So
because my biggest concern, and as I was reading through the appellant's report, was the trash part of it that could have a big effect on the condors and their chicks. But, and yes, that we could have all these things in place, but they wouldn't necessarily be carried out. But knowing that there's going to be a monitor there, then they will have to be carried out. They will have to maintain the cleanliness and the trash not there and picked up and whatever.
Right.
So all those will be mitigated on-site regularly.
And that
So-
individual who does the biological monitoring has to be approved by your county staff, so it's not going to be me or somebody like that. It's going to be someone who's qualified to do it. And number D, 12D, describes all of just what you described to ensure that no condors have in any way, shape, or form affected as a result of these operations,
Now, it just
including
take-
stopping the operation.
Right, and just to take it a little further, will they have some sort of a reporting document or a report that is going to be kept,
Yes,
a
because-
diary of some sort of
Because
what
it's a
they've done?
mitigation measure that is reported to the county on a regular basis, the carrying out of the mitigations to ensure that they're followed through, that they're carried out.
All right, and then I just thought of another question. When us giving this application approval, they still have to go to the state to get approval? Or
Right, through
the
the-
Citadel still?
Right, through what they call DOGGR is the
Right,
acronym.
Dogger. Will Dogger have additional mitigation requests? Does that happen, or?
They normally look at the environment, use the environmental document that the county has prepared in issuing their permit. If they feel, I guess, that there's something related to their area of expertise, they're called a responsible agency or the lead agency that needs additional conditions, they would do that normally.
Okay.
So,
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Munzer?
Yes, Mr. Chair, may I have Scott come back up?
Pardon me?
May I have Scott
Oh,
from the
yeah.
Pinnacles come back up?
Sorry about that. Probably should have never let you sit down.
That's just fine, thank you.
Is the California Fish and Game, or Fish and Wildlife, a recognized authority on the condors, or is it more the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the recognized expert?
Each agency has their own. There is state regulations that look out for endangered species on a state level and on a federal level. The California condor is recognized under both agencies as a threatened species.
So I guess by your initial comment, then you're not fully comfortable with the report back we got from state agency, and you'd rather hear back from the federal agency. Is that correct?
Based on what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has said in their letter on this matter, we would request that they have further consultation with them, with the federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
And the fact that they were sent a copy of the mitigation efforts and they did not respond?
I wouldn't be able to answer to that one.
Okay.
That would be a question for them again.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you.
Scott.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Laura Walter.
Hello, my name is Laura Walter, and I would just like to ask you to uphold the appeal and reject this project. It makes no sense, in my estimation, to risk our air, our water, our environment to produce more dirty oil when we need clearly to start to use alternatives to fossil fuel and respond to the climate crisis in a sane way. Thank you.
Gloria Biaki.
Casey. Thank you for letting me speak here. I'm here to ask you to please uphold this appeal and reject this project, because this project site is, as you know, only miles from the Pinnacles National Park, and it's home to the critically endangered California condor. And we all know that this is a beautiful and a special area. The water that will rise to the surface from the steam project, and it does rise because there's steam, and that's water. It will be oil and chemical laden. And this is not healthy for the foraging condors, among the other wildlife, and the folks that live around there. Now that the Pinnacles is a national park, there will be increased tourism, which is increased revenue to the county. So something that I'm thinking, and I'm going to ask this question of you, is do you think that the heavy truck traffic that will be for the Citadel project and the atmospheric effects of this project, will this make this place a less desirable place and harm the tourism income stream that you all have here going? Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else would like to address the board? Please step to the podium and state your name for the record, please.
I'm Joe Spencer, and I live in near or right next to the Hinkle Ranch. And my concern is we have cattle there. What guarantees can you give us that this procedure will not contaminate that water in any aspect where the cattle can't drink it? And what's going to happen to these millions and millions of gallons that they use that will be contaminated water? Is it going to be laid out on the ground? Is it going to be shipped off? Or is it going to be pumped back into the ground again, with giving it more chances to contaminate the basic water table?
Thank you. Anyone else from the public would like to address the board? Please step forward and state your name, address. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Les Sands, 39046 Airline Highway. My main concern is I am 2.5 or roughly 2 miles east of the Five Oaks Ranch. And, well, I'm bordered at Five Oaks Ranch, but my wells are about 2.5 miles from where they're going to put these wells. I'm upstream. Now, if they're going to get water out of the ground there, that could very well drain our water. We run 2,000 head of stocker cattle. What do we have left? Thank you.
Sir, before you step down, I need to get a sense, I understand the water and what wells yield over here, naturally in my district, but I don't have no clue what the water is like that,
Well,
down there. What kind of yields do you get in?
A real good stock well will produce 10 to 12 gallons a minute, and we have storage. And the storage, non-use times is when you fill up your storage. We have one well that'll produce 80 gallons a minute. It is in the valley above where they're going to do this drilling. That well covers 3/4 of our ranch. We pump it to various places. If we lose that well, we're done. We're over with. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to close the public comment period. And what I'm going to do is ask Mr. Lombardo to come to the podium, maybe answer some questions from the board, and also maybe refute some of the, from the comments from the public. And then after he's done, I'll have you come up. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to the endangered species, the conditions of approval don't allow them to be harmed. The mitigations are in place to prevent them from being harmed. And of course, the person at most risk, if they are harmed, is sitting right there next to me, because he's the one who's going to go to jail. So I guarantee you he has no interest at all in seeing any endangered species injured by this project, and the conditions imposed by the county staff and your planning commission ensure that that will not be the case. As to water, that's also a concern that is not new today. In fact, in the agreement, contract which we have with Mr. Hinkle, in which he agreed to provide his support for this project, included a requirement that his well is the closest well to us, and we have to monitor his well during all of these operations to make sure that we are not injuring in any way, shape, or form his water source for his agricultural activity, which is not stock water. It's production for vineyards, I believe it is, in the orders of hundreds of gallons a minute. The amount of water sounds like a lot of water, 15 million gallons over a potential 5-year test period, but that assumes two things. That's the worst case scenario, if you will, in terms of the most water being used if it goes its full term. That equates to roughly 45 acre-feet, which, as staff report points out, is effectively a very small amount of agricultural production over a 5-year period. In terms of the impact on the aquifer, again, it's not my opinion, it's not even your staff's opinion. The San Benito County Water District also weighed in and said the exact same thing, that that's an inconsequential amount of water in this basin and was not a significant impact and required no mitigation. In spite of that, the staff has requested, and again, we agreed by contract with Mr. Hinkle to obtain his support for the project, that we would monitor his wells, and we're monitoring them for the county as well, pursuant to your new ordinance, or conditions that will come from your new ordinance we've agreed to ensure that if there is an effect, immediately the water is not pumped from that aquifer any longer. We bring it in from other sources. So again, that's an impact that has been mitigated.
Mr. Lombardo, if I could stop you right
Sure,
there for
absolutely.
a second for a question that I had that kind of, because we use the word monitor, and a lot of times that connotation is for quality only, but what anyone who has a well and is dependent on it also, that the drawdown, is there a mechanism on the, or requirement with the monitoring for the drawdown effects over a period of time?
Yeah, the standing, what's called, I believe, the standing water level, typically when the pump is at rest, you look at what the standing water level is. If it's not, I can't, in truth, I can't answer whether that's part of the monitoring program, but it could easily be incorporated into it, because when they're doing a water quality test of that, if it's not, it certainly could be, it should be. So
Yeah,
we could
yeah, I
certainly
think that
make
would-
sure that's a condition.
You know, especially in the fact that the neighbor came up and expressed a concern about, a drawdown or
Yeah, the standing water level in the well would be
goes
reduced.
down, it's significantly more expensive to pump, or you could possibly lose a well for a period of time. But I think that should be part of the monitoring requirement.
Yeah, that's certainly, it may be already. I apologize that I can't remember whether that condition includes that, but it's something that could easily be done at the same time and make sense to ensure that you're not only ensure you have no quality impact, but also no quantity impact in those terms as well. Unfortunately, for various reasons, there's misinformation about the project. One of the speakers talked about us spewing oil or chemical-laden water on the ground. Everything in California, as any of you know who are in any kind of interaction with the air board, water board, there's no spewing of anything anywhere. This is a closed-loop system. All the materials that come out of the ground are maintained in tanks. They've not sprayed on the ground, dumped on the ground, piped on the ground. And so everything is maintained in a closed system. The water that's used in what's called the huff and puff, the low-pressure steam, is recycled and reused, so it's not wasted. And anything that's a waste product is properly disposed of as required by the laws of the state of California for disposal of liquid or solid or gas waste. And this, again, sending you reports that talk about methane gas emissions from oil wells that are thousands of feet deep are simply irrelevant to this project. This is not a methane gas-laden structure. We're at 300 feet depth, and this is not a formation that contains methane gas. If there is methane gas, you can't emit it into the air. It has to be captured and disposed of properly. It's the law. Compliance with the law is something that we have to do. So these hypotheticals of how something terrible is going to happen assumes you're going to break the law, and that's not obviously something the gentleman over there is going to do, because he's going to pay the consequences, and we would obviously lose our permit, and he wouldn't have any opportunity to proceed. So there's been nothing either submitted in the thousands and thousands of page document dump you received for the appeal, or the ones, I don't know if you saw the one that arrived at 5 o'clock last night from the appellant. There's nothing new in there. There's nothing that countervails the evidence in the record, your staff's opinion, or proves that the mitigations will either be ineffective or inadequate at ensuring no significant impact. So we thank you for your time. We thank you for all the hard work that the staff has put into this over the last year and a half, and particularly your Planning Commission, who went over all of this with a fine-tooth comb at arriving at this condition and this project approval. Thank you.
Great, thank you. 1 second before you step down, Mr. Lombardo. Is there any other questions from the board?
I have another question, Mr.
Supervisor
Chair.
Barrios?
Yeah, there's reference to that the applicant shall designate a company representative as the point of contact. Will this representative be in addition to the biologist?
Yes.
Okay, so now we'll have 2 people that are actually monitoring this, because this does specifically say that they have to report, any injuries, any inadvertently killing of a special species.
Everything.
So you will have.
Yeah,
more than
absolutely.
one
That's a person who will be here on site,
throughout
so to speak.
okay.
And that person will be the contact person for the neighbors. That he's the one who's going to have the cell phone on 24 hours a day,
And he'll be the contact
7
person
days
the
a week.
county will call if
Right,
there's
and
any
that'll be the contact person for everybody, for everything.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Rivas?
Yeah, I have a couple questions that are relevant here. Now, let me begin by saying that, I am trying to be as balanced as possible, because, and the reason I say that is because I'm trying my hardest to poke holes in this thing, because you could ask my colleagues, I'm probably the most anti, especially when it comes to fracking, oil production, I really care about the environment. And the reason I'm struggling is because this is a proposal for a use permit for testing and exploration, and that's a difference for me, is you may see a different side of me when it's up for a full-scale, full production project, because I think that the impacts are a lot more meaningful. But the questions I have here, my first one is related to wastewater. You know, I think that in the packet that we got, it talked about wastewater and really our options. That once, sure, it's fresh water, but once, you know, it comes in contact with the oil, it's going to have, there's going to be that time when it's separated, the oil and the wastewater. And the two options basically were to dispose of the water in injection wells, which I'm absolutely opposed to, or that it will be taken off-site. Now, you know, should we get to the point where we're about to approve this, I certainly want to strike out, inject that water, and I don't care what the testing says, if it's safe or not. I think it needs to be shipped off-site. I think the options were somewhere in Kern County. I would rather we take that route. I think that all that wastewater should be shipped off-site, and that it's disposed of, you know, beyond San Bernardino County. The second is related to traffic. I'm a little concerned. There was a reference in here that talked about the water. Now, there's a couple issues with water. It's my understanding that in the resolution that's proposed, there's going to be the testing at the expense, I believe, of the applicant for regular testing. So I guess how regular will the testing be of the water there? And then also, my question of the water related to traffic is, it said in the report that, let's see, how much HTO will be required to use is 54 acres a foot. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the worst, if you want to call it the
over
the
5
longest
years.
test
And so
period
what
if
does
it
that
goes 5 years.
translate onto traffic? Because the concern I have is it says also here the existing access to road, it says improvements to this road may be required. So, you know, as far, you know, how's that going to translate to, you know, the daily average of trips? I mean, is that in the report or did I miss it? And I mean, so what kind of impacts are we talking about? You know, especially for the residents that live out there, that could be a problem. So those are really the questions I have right now, Mr. Chair.
Maybe I took the liberty to figure it out. If we do what you're suggesting is truck all the wastewater off, if it computes out to the 17 million gallons of water, I think you could truck about 5,000 gallons per truckload. That's about 20 tons. And in an acre foot, there's 325,000 gallons of water, give or take a few gallons there. And that's 3,400 truck trips. So in and out, that would be 7,800 truck trips if you dispose of the water in that fashion. And that kind of leads me to ask, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you were to inject the water back into the well, the cattle rancher that was up a few minutes ago expressed a concern about his wells and his water quality so the cattle could continue drinking it. To inject the water back in, the way I read the report, would be monitored through the State Water Resources Control Board to meet a certain standard. How do we meet that standard in a kind of a rural setting that we have there?
Yeah, the answer is twofold. First, the water wouldn't be put back into the groundwater aquifer that the farmer's well is located. It's into the oil reservoir. It's not into the drinking water aquifer. The water's returned into the volume or the location where the oil is located, which is approximately 300 feet higher than the level of the groundwater aquifer. So it's not the reinjection of the water is into the oil reservoir, not into the groundwater aquifer, number one. Number two is, and this is, for example, what has been going on for a long time in San Ardo, the disposal of the water into the oil-bearing strata. The water has to meet drinking water standards. So Supervisor Rivas is correct. When the water comes out of the ground, it's obviously mixed with oil at that point, whether it's naturally occurring water that's in the same strata or whether it's the steam that's being used to flow the oil out. But it has to be cleaned just as we have tertiary cleaned sewage that we put on golf courses or on food crops. That's the same requirement, is we have to meet what's called Title 22, which is the California Clean Drinking Water Act standards, and that is monitored by either the state or the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal EPA. So the water has to be tested just like it does when it comes out of a sewer treatment plant to ensure that it meets drinking water standards. So based on, I could certainly understand Supervisor Rivas' concerns if we were pumping this water back down into the same hole that the drinking water is coming back out of, but that's not the case. It's being disposed of in the oil-bearing strata. So in what's going on in San Ardo, for example, the drinking water is going down into the water, which is drinking water, then is disposed of in that oil-bearing strata location. So from a traffic and transportation standpoint, I think, again, with the mitigations in place, with the requirement that we report, monitor, and ensure that we're talking about water that you and I could walk up and drink out of the tap, that disposing it in the location where the oil would be coming out of, if it comes out of there, is a solution that's better than truck trips. But if the the negative declaration does describe and discuss those number of average daily trips, for both the possibility of bringing water in if a well isn't drilled on site, and initially that's what's going to happen because we don't know what's going to happen with the water, but to ensure that there can be no impact on either Mr. Hinkle's wells or anyone else's groundwater as a result of the disposal of this water, because it literally has to be cleaner than the water that comes out that's used on the farms. I mean, it has to be water that we could drink out of the drinking fountain here in the county building. So that's a simplified version of it, but certainly whatever the board feels, but we would appreciate the flexibility of doing either, so long as we're talking about water that is monitored and certified as being drinking water quality that goes back into the ground. For that matter, it could be given to Mr. Hinkle to use for his cattle operation. Anybody could use it. It doesn't have to be put back in the ground. It could be given to him for use on his operation. So that's
That might be better.
That's, I think, the alternatives.
Do you have any further questions, Supervisor Rivas? Okay, well, I still have a couple of questions, Mr. Lombardo.
Sorry, Mr. Patella.
Sorry, I just want to make sure we cover everything in my own, how I could vote with a clear mind. Because I want to get past this wastewater issue, because water is a big thing for me. It always has been all my life. But from what I understood from this project, it's to be a shallow oil reserve. And, speaking with you yesterday, the description I have is that the oil, oddly enough, is above the groundwater, the water. So you're pulling oil from a shallow area. So if we were to go back and inject the water back into the void of where the oil was, wouldn't there be a possibility that water would leach down to deeper depths, because the viscosity of water is a lot thinner than maybe heavy oil, and possibly, draw down what remnants of oil from an area that probably doesn't flow very easily right now into a deeper depth where water would be?
Is it possible for me to address this question?
Yeah,
yes, please do. Yes, absolutely. It's really important that. Yeah.
I'm President and CEO of Citadel Exploration. If that were a possibility, it would be happening right now. Currently, the reservoir that we're targeting has about a 50% oil to water saturation. We know that from the coring and sidewall sampling that's been done there. I'm simply going to produce both oil and water from that reservoir and then re-inject the water that we produced back into the reservoir to maintain reservoir pressure and quality. That's it. I'm not adding any chemicals. I'm not doing anything special to it. taking the oil out of the ground, cleaning it from the water, putting the water back in the ground. That's it. Very simply.
Okay.
Now, the steam from produced water, if I can, I'm going to clean that water to get it to drinking quality. It's basically food grade. You take that clean steam and put that into your reservoir, and it helps heat that oil up, making it mobile, because right now it's sitting and it's viscous. So if I decrease the viscosity of it, bring it to the surface, clean that water back out, I can maintain water or reservoir pressure, and in addition, produce my oil. Simply. I hope that summarizes that accurately.
Yeah, that does help. But at the end of the project, you'll have
no oil, hopefully, and water.
And water, right.
So it's
And-
cleaner when I'm done.
Right. And in the EIR, or not the EIR, we don't have one, but the mitigated negative deck, there's two actions of getting rid of that wastewater. One was...
That's the produced water. You're calling it wastewater, and I don't understand the use of that word right now. The produced water that's coming from the ground will be cleaner when I inject it back in than it was when I took it out. I should be getting paid to do this job.
Okay.
Okay?
So it would make sense, possibly, because the thought just crossed my mind, I was wondering if you explored it or our planning staff explored it, rather than re-injecting that water and someone else having to pump it up somewhere along the line. Why not use it for cattle? Mr. Hinkle could use it for cattle or irrigated pasture or something along those lines.
If this is a commercially viable project, then we'll explore the opportunity to distribute water. Right now, I have a constitutional right to produce the water. It's property that I own. I have that right through my lease. I bought that. I can produce all the water that I need, requisite to produce my oil. It's associated with my lease that I have from Occidental Petroleum.
But you know where I'm going with that.
Sure.
Okay, just a thought for everybody to think about.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Arman? Go ahead.
Now, I have two. One of them we haven't touched on yet, but you probably have the answer for me. There will be some storage tanks, oil storage tanks, wash tanks, wastewater storage tanks. Will that equipment or supplies be held in the proposed 3,600 square feet per well? Will they be in the same proximity or the same area?
Yes, they will be.
They will be. So there will not be additional property needed to put
No,
those
there
in
will not
there? Okay. And then in regards to the roads that did come up earlier, and if there is any grading or, if there are additional roads that need to be built, those will have to get an additional permit. You
Yes.
can't just build them. You'll have to go back to planning, say, this is what I need to do, and then you have to do it by our criteria
Absolutely.
for those roads.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Munzer?
I was trying to find this out yesterday, and I never got a clear answer. You purchased the mineral rights through a lease, correct?
I have a lease, correct. I haven't purchased the minerals. I have a lease from the fee mineral interest owner.
Yeah, and that lease also gives you the rights to the water?
Yes, it does.
That's what I was trying to find
Anything I
out.
deem convenient to produce oil, I have the right to do.
Say that again?
Anything I deem convenient to produce the oil, giving me a lot of latitude. It's a very good lease. Because of the mineral deed, it was written in 1908 by Standard Oil. It's a very good lease for the landowner.
Okay, and I was trying to find that out yesterday through our water district and other sources, and I never did get a clear answer.
Yes.
So you do have the lease?
Mineral owner.
No, I
Yes.
understand that.
It's a
I
very good
understand
lease
that.
for me as the lessee right now.
Yes, yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
One last thing, Mr. Chairman, of course, when Armin was talking about oil out, water in, of course, this is just the test program. So and again, in answer partially to Supervisor Rivas' question or statement earlier, in terms of the commercial production, if the test program indicates that that's a feasible alternative, then we'll be back to start all over again with a whole new permit, with whole new analysis of water disposal on a commercial scale rather than on this test scale, which in terms of the volume of the oil reservoir and the amount of water we're talking about is obviously minuscule in terms of volume. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. I'll ask the biodiversity folks.
Thank you. So it seems like there are a lot of questions about this project and a lot of confusion as to what it exactly entails, you know, trucking the water off site, what happens if it stays on site. These are things that should have been discussed. This isn't the proper time to iron through all of these details. And here, it indicates that an environmental impact report is necessary. Some of the more specific stuff, I don't want there to be any confusion about what's happening. You know, they call it just test wells, but then they also said they're taking oil out of the ground. So they will be producing oil. That's clearly foreseeable. And
Mr. Chair.
Please, we allow.
It's something that is. It's something that's even. I'll say it's analyzed in the initial study. It's something they talk about. It's part of what they describe as the project. I'll put it that way. And even for these test wells, the staff says that about 55% of these test wells end up becoming production wells. So when we're talking about what's clearly foreseeable, which is what the standard is under CEQA, that has to be considered as well, and it wasn't considered in the initial study. And another thing that there seems to be confusion on is what the studies we submitted are about. I've heard the term steam flooding referred to it, as opposed to cyclic steam injection. If you look in the initial study, it says cyclic steam injection repeatedly. Mr. Lombardo himself said huff and puff, which is another term for cyclic steam injection. A quote from a Kolofsky study that we included in the record. Cyclic steam injection, begin quote, cyclic steam injection presents some of the harshest conditions, and they were talking about conditions in the well, presents some of the harshest conditions you can create in the well. And cyclic steam injection, that is what the California Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources found was at fault for the death of the oil worker in Kern County. Not steam flooding, in specific, not just steam flooding. It specifically mentioned cyclic steam injection. Regarding some of the mitigation for the California tiger salamander, one of the things that the Department of Fish and Wildlife suggested originally that hasn't been done here is that because they don't have 2 years of surveys, the department said that they needed to have about a 1.2-mile buffer around the water, the pond on site. That's not a mitigation measure here. They also said that there should be 50-foot buffers around the small mammal burrows. Again, that's not part of the mitigation here. For the California condors, they said that I don't want there to be confusion about when they'll be on site. The monitors will not be on site during steam injection, soaking, and production, which takes up for each of the wells, they're assumed to take, in the initial study, they're assumed to take about 180 days. Injection, soaking, and production, when the monitor will not be on site, is 164 of those days. They will be on site during that period once a week, not the whole time. So, CEQA must be interpreted to offer the fullest possible protection for the environment. Where there's a conflict in the evidence, the requirement is for a full environmental impact report. Even if the applicant disagrees that substantial evidence requires the production of an EIR. And again, you guys obviously have a lot of questions about this stuff, and it really should have been analyzed in the CEQA document. Thank you, and thank you very much for having this hearing today. I really appreciate all of your time and the time it took you to review the material, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Okay, great. Is there any questions, Supervisor Rivas?
I don't really know if it's a question or more of a comment, but, you know, like I said before, I really try to poke holes in this thing. But what I've struggled with, in all fairness to the applicant, is the fact that a lot of the examples that were cited, I think the Center for Biological Diversity brings up some good points, some valid points. But the examples that were used or have been used and discussed, you know, it said in our report that, you know, they come from reports that cover a number of years from large, full production oil fields rather than more directly to issues that are specifically related to this project or a test program that is very similar to this project. And so in all fair to the applicant, you know, you have to, when I look at the requirement of an EIR, which is the point here, in my opinion, it's arbitrary and really contrary to case law that's already been set here in California, where, you know, law here in California, or the case law that we have, it doesn't require the preparation of an EIR per se in addressing the environmental impacts of a commercial oil production prior to the drilling of test wells. And that's due to the fact that such a document would tend toward uninformative generalities due to the unreliability of the information available at such an early stage, and would not serve to inform the process, as is the purpose of CEQA. Now, you know, I understand the concerns, and I just think that based on the fact that it's, you know, for exploration and testing, that when we start to talk about a full-scale production and project, we're kind of dealing with a whole separate issue, where, you know, they have to come back before the board, where, you know, at that point, I agree with all the points that have been made that they need to be explored further. So I'm not sure if you want to add or, you know, try to say that I'm wrong, but...
Well, I'll just say again, the initial study does describe for each well there being a 400-gallon tank, and that through the 180 days for each well, that tank filling up with oil once per week and being taken off site to be sold. So the description indicates some production here. Otherwise, there hasn't been a sufficient reason given, or there hasn't been, they haven't really distinguished the studies that we've provided. This isn't just a test well, and there's no requirement. CEQA doesn't require that we have a study specifically for this site. One thing I'd also like to mention that I forgot to mention before, I'm unaware of any law requiring the capture of all methane from an operation, which I think Mr. Lombardo said. It certainly hasn't been described in the initial study. I don't think there is such a law, simply.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I have a follow-up question for staff. You know, I think a statement was just made that it's their opinion that this isn't just a test well. So is it a test well or is it not a test well?
If this project is successful, then it will, you know, yes, there will be some oil produced, but it's a limited amount. If this project is successful, they're going to return to the Planning Commission with a new application to make it a permanent well. Right now, it's limited to 5 years with a limited amount of production.
Okay. And so, is the production going to be monitored at all, or, you know, how do we know? You know, you say it's a limited amount of production. You know.
Well, they will be transmitting to the county copies of all the reports that Dogger monitors the, the production of the oil. So the county will be, the petroleum administrator will be watching what goes on at the site.
Their production. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I have a couple of questions, and some of the questions that the board asks, it's because our planning staff has worked on this project for a year and a half, and I'm sure they worked really hard to make sure everything is up to the requirements that we have to have in order to issue a permit. And our planning commission have had a number of meetings on this as well, and the Board of Supervisors, we work hard to bring ourselves up to speed, and the best opportunity we have to talk to people is sometimes here at the meeting, and we get a stack like this to go through over a weekend. And so that's why a lot of the questions come forward, and we emphasize in areas that we kind of understand. Myself with the water, and one of the big things that I think is impressive with this application, and I get the sense that there's still, concern one way or the other, is that we're going to make an effort to monitor water quality and the use of water, and that's far more than probably other areas of the state does. And and this applicant has been very willing to, provide us with the information, not only for usage on the project area, but any type of impacts that it would have in the surrounding areas. And I personally appreciate that. And I would think that biodiversity or anybody else would think that's a step forward.
Right. I'm sure they put a lot of hard work into this. The CEQA law states, however, that if there is substantial evidence in the record supporting a fair argument, again, it's a very low standard. If there's substantial evidence in the record supporting a fair argument that there could be significant impacts, an EIR is necessary. And to the extent that the project has been characterized as, oil out, just taking it in and out of the formation, clearly the studies in the record show that's not the case. Cyclic steam injection is not simply, pulling the oil out of the ground with a straw. It's known to result in a high number of well failures. We've seen this in Canada with it causing pollution of 2 aquifers. Any monitoring that might occur will only happen after the fact. So there is substantial evidence in the record supporting a fair argument that, for instance, the oil that they do pull out of the ground, what's the greenhouse gas impact associated with that? It's not discussed in the initial study. If substantial evidence in the record supports a fair argument that there could be significant impacts, an EIR is required by law.
And the other issue that was pretty prevalent today was the biological issues, such as with the condor and tiger salamander, and there was about 5 or 6 different species that were identified, and we have a biologist overseeing this. What more can you do other than not have the project?
Well, for instance, like what the California Department of Fish and Wildlife suggested, and what's in the record, is that without 2 years of surveys, they indicated that they would want a buffer around the pond of 1.2 miles. it's not part of the project here.
Yeah. And my last thing, really, my very last thing, is that I think this is one of the safest use permits that this county would issue, in the fact that you have definite timelines as far as the of the project and an expiration within 5 years. And if there is, you know, a success with the oil drilling, the applicant needs to come back, and we would have a record of performance in which we would, you know, weigh a future project, and also see what the true impacts are on an area. And I think this is the most prudent way to, you know, go forward.
Again, I'll just say that there is substantial evidence in the record supporting a fair argument that significant impacts could occur. When looking at what CEQA requires, you know, the value of the project for later projects isn't going to answer that question for you necessarily. So I'd ask you guys that when you consider this project, to think of it in that way. You know, is there substantial evidence in the record here that there could be significant impacts? And I think the record clearly shows that's the case.
Okay. I want to thank you. There might be another supervisor, but from myself, thank you for taking the time and bringing up these issues. It's an important part of our process, and it keeps everybody doing what they're supposed to be doing, no matter how this goes forward. Again, thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I'd like to thank you guys for all the time you took. And Denise, you as well. You were very helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else? Or?
Just closing comments, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
is that
Thank you very much.
the areas of concern, which to me were primarily water and the Condor, have been mitigated or will be mitigated to my satisfaction. And this is the place. Anytime there's an appeal, this is the place to be asking questions and getting answers. And I believe that I got the answers that I needed. And so, again, the mitigation process is to my satisfaction. So I will be supporting the resolution, provided that we correct about 4 typos on it. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, if I could make one comment about the mitigation as well. Mr. Hofstadter is referring to a condition requirement of Fish and Game that was not implemented. It's because they revised their mitigation requirement as part of the second initial study. So I just wanted to make that, put that on the record. That buffer requirement went away, and a new mitigation measure, which we incorporated, was put in its place.
Okay. Thank you. Supervisor Munzer?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I guess my feeling is that we don't have to rush into this. There were some issues brought up, and I'd rather err on the side of caution than on just hurrying it. One of the staff recommendations is to continue the matter to a future date, and that's what I'm leaning towards. And some of the reasons for that is I feel that the permit should be amended to, if the water use goes beyond the 53.8 acres drawn from the basin, then further analysis should be done in the mitigated negative deck. I feel the standing water test levels is a great thing, and we need to determine whose wells we're going to test, whether it's Mr. Spencer's, Mr. Sands, Mr. Hinkle's wells. We're going to test to make sure they're not dropping to an inappropriate level. I'm concerned that the U.S. Wildlife, or U.S. Fish and Wildlife, is not here today, for one thing. But also, we cannot just neglect, if they have concerns and those concerns have not been addressed, then we need to take the time to make sure they are addressed. and I preferred to have staff contact them as opposed to the applicant contacting them and get those concerns clarified and addressed. So I think, again, it's the water issues and the issues of the condors that I feel need to be addressed before we go forward with this project. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Rivas?
Mr. Chair, like I've said in the past, or, like I just said, I think what you alluded to is, I thank the applicant because I think they've gone above and beyond. When I look at this permit, or the issuance of this permit, in my opinion, it's low risk because all the applicant is proposing to do is explore and test for what possibly could be future, large-scale production of oil. And at that time, it becomes a separate issue, in my opinion, because then you're dealing with greater impacts. And then I think, we certainly, as a board, will have to weigh, or whoever's here will have to weigh, that project against the impacts that that it can have. But I think that, as Supervisor Marjorie Barrio said, I think that the mitigations that are in place are to my liking. I'm satisfied with what the applicant has agreed to. There are a number of conditions that the applicant has agreed to, and the fact that he's agreed to do that, I thank him because we have asked him to do a whole bunch. And I think that it's a good thing for this project. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor De La Cruz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remember when we had the early discussions about the ordinance, and now I'm seeing the benefits of the ordinance. We talked about the administrator making sure that those guidelines and those conditions and those mitigations are being set in place, and I do appreciate it. So. I do see the benefits of the ordinance that's come forward to the board in the next couple of weeks, and I also noticed that the applicants also has gone beyond what is asking, and I do believe that the Planning Commission did the right thing by moving forward. It's a test pilot project, and just like Supervisor Rivas said, once they submit an application, once they move forward to the next phase, then we can start talking about different part of testing, different part of monitoring, different part of requirements. So I will support it today, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Barros, you have any more?
No, I'll make a motion on this.
Okay, I myself am satisfied with the conditions and mitigations in place, and I pretty much this whole project conforms with our oil gas ordinance. Again, the water monitoring, I think we have to have a baseline value established as far as with the standing water levels as well. Of course, those go up and down in our drought years. We all know that, and it's a dry year this year, but still, I think that needs to be monitored as closely as quality. That should be a new standard set for the state, as far as I'm concerned. The wildlife, and I know Supervisor Munzer expressed concerns that Fish and Game was not here, but at the end of the day, if a condor gets sick, it's pretty easy to tell if it's from oil. And it's pretty easy to tell the location and where and how. And I wouldn't want to be the person responsible for getting a condor sick or killed, or a tiger salamander or anything like that. I almost feel sorry for the people that own land around there. I'm happy I don't have any condors in San Juan Valley. Personally, I don't know how I'd deal with that, but I honestly think that there's enough incentives for private landowners to make sure that they do not harm endangered species, and this project is going to be under a microscope. I think we're all be watching it. The counties will be watching it very closely. I think the environmental folks are be watching it very closely, as well as the neighbors. And so I would like, to move this forward and support, denial of the appeal. Supervisor Munzer?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion if I can.
Okay.
I'd like to make
I'm sorry. If there's going to be any modifications of any of the conditions of approval, perhaps we should take a 5-minute break just to make sure that the conditions of approval are exactly the way the board would like them to be adopted.
Okay.
Back to you, Mr. Chair, with due respect, Supervisor Munzer, that might not be necessary.
Okay.
I'd like to make the motion that the board provides direction to staff and continues the matter to July 23rd. That's our second meeting in July, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, to the July 23rd, 2013 for further action.
The applicant indicates,
I'm actually going to be out of the country, so is there an earlier July meeting?
All right, then the July 9th.
Or the 16th?
July 9th.
July 9th with the modifications of what staff heard as far as with some of the conditions is what?
Yes, yes.
pardon? If the board could actually take action if we didn't do so already, closing the public hearing and then continue it to July 9th was it at 9 o'clock or 1:30 for the actual decision by the board?
Well, Mr. Chair,
wait,
why are we
wait.
going to continue if we're going to, if Supervisor Munzer's motion does go forward? I understand the need to continue it, but if it doesn't go forward and the board makes a different direction, why do we need to continue it?
Well, why don't we discuss what some of the modifications that staff feels that we need to make in the resolution of denial is what I understand.
But you have a motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
With no second.
Okay, I need clarification from council. If I want to continue this, are we continuing the public hearing? Because that was not my intention.
No, I would actually request that the board close the public hearing and then continue it for,
Okay, then-
at the next board meeting, anybody still has the right to do public comment, but the formal public hearing portion is closed. And that would close the actual time to submit written documentation on it. Well, I guess somebody could try to submit a letter at the next hearing, but it would actually close the formal public hearing.
So the chair, so that needs to be part of my motion that we're closing the public hearing, or the chair needs to close the public?
I
The chair
could
would
do
close
that.
the public
Okay.
hearing.
Okay. I'm going to close the public hearing.
Now I would let Supervisor Munzer make his motion.
Now it's-
Okay, all right. Now, I would make the motion that the board provide direction to staff, continue the matter to July 9th, 2013 for further action.
I'm going to second that just for discussion. I would like to, what would you like done on the 9th? that
What
we
I
can't
would
do
like,
now?
what I would like to see is the conditional use permit amended to these issues. If the water usage goes beyond 53 acre feet drawn from the basin, then the additional amount must be analyzed in a mitigated negative declaration. I would also like staff to find out if, as part of the water monitoring condition, that the standing water test or standing water level test is included, and if it is, whose wells are going to be tested. And then for staff to also contact the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and further study of their comment letter.
Mr. Chair, for just as a comment, all the three items that Supervisor Munzer has addressed have been mitigated I've heard them already, and I believe they have been addressed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just comment. I do not believe that I believe now the applicant can go over 53.8 feet of water without having to come back to it. And because of the concerns of the water basin, then I want that to be studied, and that's not in the conditional use permit this time. And I did not hear from staff that the standing water level test is included. They thought it might be, so I just want to make sure it is in.
I believe that the condition of approval that's currently written addresses water quality more than water quantity or standing water levels. So with the board's direction, we would modify condition of approval number 33B to address drawdown of water as well as water quality. So we'll modify it and bring back a proposed additional condition of approval regarding water levels, if that's the direction of the board. The applicant has indicated that they are not opposed to the 53.8 acre feet as a condition of approval, and also that they have no opposition to including water quantity testing as well.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Anthony Lombardo on behalf of the applicant. We would obviously much prefer a decision today after a year and a half, and we certainly have no problem with the board directing staff to add the two conditions. That 53.8 is what analyzed in the neg deck. That's our limit. And number two, the water quality testing, which is already in a condition, had an additional requirement to monitor water, standing water level or water levels. The condor conditions, I think, are unnecessary because they've already been adopted from the California Fish and Wildlife, but we'd respectfully request a decision today. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I think we could add to the condition on the water and water quality and standing water monitoring, and the biologists, you know, for Fish and Game, you know, they're not here. If it was really important to them, they would have been. And, you know, again, it's just there's so many protections on the state level that I don't think, you know, you won't even want to take a chance at, you know, I think there's enough constraints protecting those endangered species anyway that you want to run a good, clean operation. And it is specified in the conditions of approval pretty detailed.
I understand that, Mr. Chair. I stand by my motion.
Okay.
And so I request a vote on it.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
Aye.
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 So that's 4-1. I'll entertain another motion.
If the board wants to approve the project today, is it possible for us to just finalize the language of a couple of these conditions of approval with a 5 or 10 minute break?
I'm going to do that. I'm going to call for a 5-minute.
Okay.
A 10-minute break, give you plenty of time. 10-minute break.
All right. Mr. Chair?
I think we're ready to begin.
Yeah.
County Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have made 5 changes to the conditions of approval that resulted from the board's direction that we just received on the motion that's pending at the moment. So if you want to pass the ordinance or the resolution today, we're going to have to read those 5 changes into the record verbatim. So I'm sorry, I apologize for that. It's going to be a little bit confusing, but Ms. Thompson has the language, and she'll kind of go paragraph by paragraph and read that language into the record.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Condition of approval 21A2 is going to be amended to add a sentence at the end of that little A subsection 2 ... or II, little II. An amended use permit shall be required prior to water usage beyond 53.8 acre feet drawn from the basin, the amount analyzed in the mitigated negative declaration. Condition of approval 35 will now state, applicant shall provide documentation to county or allow inspection of such documents within 15 days of county's request
which are sufficient as determined by county to adequately document the project's water usage. New condition of approval 36. Applicant shall be required to monitor the closest water well for drawdown resulting from operations. The petroleum administrator may conduct water quantity testing on off-site properties with landowners' permission. If operations cause significant reduction in water levels, applicant shall reduce or curtail on-site well production. All testing shall be at applicant's expense. Condition of approval 33.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Barbara, can you read that addition
Yes.
again?
Yes. The whole thing, that whole condition of approval 36. Petroleum administrator and applicant shall be required to monitor the closest water well for drawdown resulting from operations. The petroleum administrator may conduct water quantity testing on off-site properties with landowners' permission. If operations cause significant, I'll say a significant reduction in water levels, applicant shall reduce or curtail on-site well production. All testing shall be at applicant's expense. Then, condition of approval 33, subsection B, is amended in that on the second line, it's in the first sentence, the distance of 1 mile is altered to 3 miles. And the only other change in that section is the last 14 words of that subsection B are eliminated. So the words that are eliminated are through a fee which may be established by the Board of Supervisors by resolution. So it'll just, that last sentence just shall read, applicant shall be responsible for the expenses of water quality testing, period.
Okay, so those are the changes that staff has worked out in accordance with what we thought we heard some members of the board wanted. So the motion that I think is in front of the board is to deny the appeal, but to amend the Planning Commission's decision to incorporate the suggested modifications that have just been read into the record by Ms. Thompson.
Is there any other questions as far as the modifications?
Mr. Chair, I have 3 or 4 corrections that need to be made to the resolution, and I would like to have those.
Yes, please.
I would like to read those on page 690, and I will get to that area.
1 second here. 6.
Okay, if you will look down at item B, impact on is in there twice, so if you could just eliminate one of those. It says impact on, so it's just in there twice. You have to eliminate one of those.
Okay.
On page number 698, and there's just typos, but it needs to read, correctly.
Okay.
On page 690, let's see. No, I'm sorry, 698. Wrong page. 698. And that would be down on the section A, second to the last sentence. It just needs to read, the only daily trips would be for, instead of would for. So the word be has to be inserted in there. On page 699, down at the very bottom of the page, where it says evidence, it should read during the rainy season to prevent runoff. The word "to" is not has to be inserted. And the last one is page 705. And it's in there twice. One of them has to be removed on finding number 6.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you're welcome. Any other discussions? I'll entertain a motion.
I will make that motion, Mr. Chair. I move, I recommend that we adopt the attached resolution with the additional conditions of approval as read by council and the corrections that need to be made, making CEQA and use permit findings, approving the mitigated negative declaration, and approving the conditional use permit, and denying the appeal. Resolution 2013-42.
Okay,
Would the maker of the motion also include and deny the appeal?
yeah, she did.
And denying the
Okay,
appeal.
sorry about that.
I will add that to my motion.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Oppose? Pass. On denial. I want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon and entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none.